Good morning and welcome. Seems like we live in a world that worships information. We have access to more knowledge than any generation in human history, more data, more research, more expert opinions, and more content than we could consume in 1,000 lifetimes. And yet, if you ask most people whether they feel wiser, the answer is usually no. More informed, perhaps. More overwhelmed, certainly, but not wiser. That distinction between knowledge and wisdom is exactly what we're exploring today. Because in unity, the understanding of the 12 powers of the soul, wisdom and judgment are not about how much you know, they're about how clearly you see. And there's a profound difference. Charles Fillmore associated the power of wisdom and judgment with James, son of Zebedee, one of the 12 disciples and one of the 3 in Jesus' innermost circle. James was there for the moments that mattered most, the transfiguration on the mountain, the Garden of Gethsemane. He was called, along with his brother John, a son of thunder. There's something in that name worth exploring. Wisdom, in its early form, can look like intensity, like strong reaction, or like knowing something so fiercely that it comes out as thunder. The journey is learning to let that fierce knowing become clear seeing. The center of the body associated with this power is the pit of the stomach, that place where something lands before we have words for it, before our minds have organized an argument, or before you can explain yourself. Your body already knows. We've all had the experience, a decision that looked perfect on paper but felt wrong in your gut. A situation that everyone said was fine, but something in you wouldn't settle. That unsettled feeling wasn't anxiety, it was wisdom speaking in the only language it had available. And we are going to touch on that somatic knowing today. It isn't the center of the talk, but it's the doorway, because wisdom begins in the body and moves outward into how we see, how we discern, and ultimately how we treat one another. The Transfiguration is the passage that most illuminates James' function as the disciple of wisdom. In Matthew 17, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain, and there something happens that none of them had language for. His face shone like the sun, his garments became white as light. Moses and Elijah appeared. A bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces, and they were filled with awe. And Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and do not be afraid." There is so much in that moment. But what strikes me most is this: they saw clearly, more clearly than they'd ever seen, and it undid them. Pure being, pure seeing is not comfortable. It doesn't fit into our ordinary categories. It doesn't confirm what we already thought we knew. It breaks something open. And then Jesus touches them. "Rise, do not be afraid." Wisdom isn't just the capacity to see clearly, it's the capacity to stay present with what you see. So not to be destroyed by it, to not run from it, to not immediately translate it into something smaller so you can manage it. Wisdom holds the vision steady. This is what Charles Fillmore meant when he wrote about wisdom and judgment as divine discrimination. Not judgment in the sense of condemnation, discrimination in the sense of discernment. the ability to perceive what is true, what is real, what matters, and what doesn't. Knowledge accumulates. Wisdom distills. You can spend 20 years studying a subject and come away with tremendous knowledge. Wisdom is what remains when you've lived with that knowledge long enough that it's changed you. Knowledge tells you what something is. Wisdom tells you what to do with it, whether to act or wait, whether to speak or be still, and whether this moment calls for engagement or for letting go. There's a beautiful simplicity to how wisdom announces itself. It doesn't argue or negotiate, it simply knows. We've all had that experience, that I just know, that you can't fully justify, but you can't honestly deny. Something in you has already arrived at an answer before your conscious mind called the meeting. Unity teaches that this knowing isn't accidental, it's not irrational, it's the activity of divine intelligence moving through you. God is not only the intelligence that created the universe, God is the intelligence that moves through you when you are still enough to receive it. That quiet knowing in the pit of the stomach, that sense of this is true or this is not right, that is spirit speaking through the instrument of your body and your deeper mind. The question is whether we trust it. We've been trained not to. We've been trained to ask for evidence, to seek a second opinion, to run it by someone else, to wait until we can explain it logically before we can act on it. And sometimes that's appropriate. But wisdom knows the difference between the appropriate caution of a complex decision and the ongoing dismissal of your own inner knowing, because you've been taught that you can't be trusted. You can be trusted. That is the unity teaching at its core. The divine lives in you. The same intelligence that hung the stars knows your name and moves through your intuition. Learning to work with that, to refine it, to test it, and grow in it is a lifelong practice of wisdom. But wisdom doesn't remain private, it's meant to move. If the divine lives in us, then wisdom must find expression through what we create, how we lead and how we live together. Divine judgment isn't a static principle, it's an active rhythm guiding ethical action, compassionate leadership, and creative care. It's what steadies us when the world asks for clarity and courage at once. When wisdom moves outward, it becomes discernment and choice, morality and motion, love translated into behavior. It's not silent approval of all things, it's engaged presence that acts without aggression. Charles called this divine discernment because true seeing always includes the next question: what must now be done in love? We meet that question constantly in decisions about our career, community, and justice, in moments when we must choose between convenience and conscience. The intellect alone can't carry that weight. It needs partnership with spirit. So wisdom in action begins before words. It begins in stillness, when we let our clarity ripen rather than rush, when we act from grounded seeing rather than anxious knowing. From there, what we do becomes both practical and sacred. A phone call offered in peace instead of defense. A decision made with care rather than ambition. A willingness to speak truth that unifies instead of divides. Acting from wisdom isn't passive. It's power expressed through gentleness. It's thunder refined into clarity. Energy that now heals instead of overwhelms. This is the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction comes from the surface. From the part of us that feels threatened or defensive, a response comes from depth, from the place that has taken time to listen, to feel into the situation, to let divine intelligence inform what happens next. Wisdom doesn't eliminate strong feelings, it transforms strong feelings into purposeful action. The thunder doesn't disappear, it becomes directed, focused, capable of breaking through what needs to be broken, without destroying what needs to remain. That is the maturation of power. That is James becoming not less himself, but more truly himself. Fierce clarity in service to love. But wisdom also has a communal form. It seeks relationship. In our shared life, discernment becomes dialogue, a rhythm of listening and speaking that reveals truth through many perspectives. Divine intelligence does not speak through one person alone. It circulates through conversations, through reflection, through the space between hearts that are willing to truly hear. Collective wisdom grows wherever people bring their individual light without insisting it is the whole sun. It asks each of us to hold our clarity with humility, to speak honestly but not finally, and to remember that the divine intelligence we trust in ourselves moves equally through others. Community often challenges that ideal. We encounter conflict, difference, ego, but those very tensions are the training ground for shared seeing. Every disagreement becomes a chance to practice wisdom, not as argument, but as grace in dialogue. When a group listens from the pit of the stomach, from still, embodied discernment rather than reactive certainty, something larger than opinion begins to guide the process. The result may not please everyone, but it carries peace because it was reached in alignment, not domination. That is collective wisdom, the intellect and intuition of many souls aligning in love. Unity calls this the activity of the Christ mind within the body of humanity. When we yield to that greater discernment, judgment becomes compassion and motion, and community itself becomes a vessel of divine clarity. Think of the early unity movement when Charles and Myrtle Fillmore gathered seekers in their living room, not to hand down the doctrine, but to explore together what was true. They trusted that when people came together in genuine openness, divine intelligence would make itself known through the conversation itself. That trust didn't mean there was no leadership or that every voice carried equal weight in every moment. It meant that the process honored everyone's capacity to receive truth directly. Collective wisdom requires that kind of trust. It requires believing that the person sitting across from you, the person whose perspective baffles you, might be carrying the piece of truth you cannot see from where you stand. And it requires the willingness to stay in the room, to keep listening, even when the process is uncomfortable, even when clarity takes longer than you want it to. Now, here's where wisdom gets most interesting and most challenging, because this is where it moves from personal discernment into relationship. Seeing clearly doesn't mean making others wrong. This is the test of genuine wisdom, and this is where a lot of us get tripped up. Because when you develop real discernment, when you start to see clearly, it can be tempting to conclude that your clarity is the whole truth. That because you can see something, everyone else should be able to see it too. That because your gut knew, your judgment is final. But wisdom recognizes the divine in every person it encounters. And that changes everything. If God is the animating presence in all of life and unity is unequivocal on this point, then the person you disagree with is also an expression of that presence. The person whose choices you find baffling, or whose path looked nothing like yours, or the one that hurt you, the person who sees the world in a way you simply cannot follow, that person is also a child of God, also carrying divine intelligence, also on a journey towards greater wholeness. Wisdom sees this. It holds both things at once. I can see clearly what is true for me, and I can honor that you are on your own path of seeing. This is not the same as having no boundaries. Wisdom absolutely knows when to step back, when to disengage, when a relationship or situation is not aligned with your growth or your well-being. Wisdom knows when to walk away, but it walks away without contempt. It sets a limit without a verdict. It says, this is not right for me, without needing to conclude, therefore you are wrong. There is a kind of seeing that diminishes what it looks at. It finds the flaw, the failure, the gap, the error. It mistakes criticism for clarity and judgment for discernment. Real wisdom does the opposite. It sees what is true without needing to reduce the one it's looking at. Think of the transfiguration again. The disciples fell on their faces. The natural human impulse when encountering something overwhelming is to collapse, to contract and make yourself smaller. Jesus touched them and says, rise. Don't collapse. Don't make this smaller than it is. Stay with what you're seeing. Wisdom invites us to do the same with one another, to not collapse people into your judgment of them, to stay with the fuller vision that this is a person in whom God lives. Whatever else may also be true. This is not always easy. In fact, one of the most demanding spiritual practices there is. It requires holding your own knowing clearly while remaining genuinely open to the knowing of others. It requires discerning what is true without weaponizing that discernment. It requires seeing and staying present with what you see, just as the disciples on the mountain were called to rise and not be afraid. Wisdom also knows something that the intellect often resists. Timing is everything. Knowledge wants to act on what it knows immediately. Wisdom understands that there is a right time for everything. A time to speak or be silent. Time to move forward. Time to wait. And wisdom knows the difference, not by consulting a formula, but by listening. Listening to that place in the pit of the stomach, to the quality of the moment, to the still small voice that speaks beneath the voice of urgency. When to act, when to wait, when to walk away. These are not decisions the mind makes well on its own. They are decisions that require the whole self, mind, body, and spirit listening together. That integration is the fullness of wisdom. That integration is what James, the son of thunder, was being developed towards every step of his journey with Jesus. This fierce knowing, learning to wait for the right moment, the clarity, learning to partner with compassion, and the strength, learning to express itself not in volume but in presence. Wisdom doesn't silence thunder, it teaches thunder when to speak, when the deep power is in being still. That discernment, that sense of divine timing, is perhaps the most difficult aspect of wisdom to develop because it runs so contrary to how we've been conditioned. We live in a culture that rewards speed, celebrates the quick response, an immediate action, the decision to move. Wisdom asks us to slow down enough to feel whether it is the right moment or whether something is still ripening, still forming, still waiting for the right conditions to emerge and form. And now it is time to take that wisdom into our meditation, because silence is how wisdom breathes. It isn't withdrawal from life, it's the clearing that makes right action possible. In silence, we feel the pulse of divine intelligence before it translates into words or deeds. It's the place where thunder becomes light. So now, let's go within and let wisdom speak. Go ahead and find a comfortable position. Take a nice deep breath. Let it all out. Take another and release it slowly. Let your body relax. And if it feels comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. If not, just soften your gaze. Let your shoulders drop. Bring your awareness to the center of your body, that place at the pit of your stomach. Not your thinking mind, but this place. Just rest your attention there gently, without forcing anything. Ask a simple question. What do I know that I haven't been willing to trust? Let the answer come in whatever form it arrives. It could be an image, a word, a feeling. Whatever surfaces, don't analyze it or judge it, just be with it. And now ask, is there someone in my life I've been seeing through the lens of judgment rather than wisdom? Someone I've reduced rather than recognized. Again, just receive what comes. But be gentle. This is not an exercise of self-criticism. This is simply an exercise in seeing clearly. In just a moment, we're going to enter our minute of silence, so let whatever came to you settle. Let wisdom do what wisdom does. Be still and clarify and make still. And as we come out of the silence, take another deep breath. Feel your body against the surface supporting you. Bring your awareness back to your surroundings. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. What makes wisdom revolutionary is not that it knows things other people don't know. It's that wisdom trusts what it knows enough to let that knowing change how it lives. The disciples on the mountain saw something they couldn't explain and couldn't forget. They came down different, not because they could articulate what happened, but because they had experienced clarity so direct, so undeniable that their old way of seeing couldn't hold. That's what wisdom does. It doesn't just inform you, it transforms you. And the transformation isn't dramatic in the way we usually imagine. It's quiet. It's the slow shift from living in your head to living in your center. It's the gradual willingness to act on what you know in your gut, even when you can't defend it in an argument. It's the growing capacity to see other people clearly without needing them to be different than they are. James didn't stop being a son of thunder. Intensity didn't go away. It matured. It found its rightful expression. And that's what happens when we commit to this power, when we practice coming back again and again to the body's knowing, to the still small voice, to the place where divine intelligence meets our particular life. The thunder becomes clarity. The reaction becomes response. Judgment becomes love in motion. You already have everything you need. Wisdom is not waiting for you to become someone else. It's waiting for you to trust who you already are. A place where God lives. A vessel through which divine intelligence is already moving. Your work is simply to listen, to refine your listening, and to act from what you hear. And so it is. Thank you.